The journey is conversations with ordinary people about stories of transformation and how we may have had setbacks in our life and how we persevered through those, how we've learned from those obstacles, and how they've maybe helped us on our path today. Well, welcome to the journey, Xavier. I know that you have been on the show once before, and that was kind of actually we were on site. I think that was a day that we were in the spring, and we were actually doing a presentation not too long after that, and that was we were talking about doing a suicide prevention, suicide awareness, suicide prevention talk that day. And but today I want to, again, for everybody that doesn't know you, Xavier Whitford. We've known each other for a while now, and as we were just talking, I've known your husband Corey even longer. When he was a young guy, young person, he was a little boy, and so. But welcome to the journey, and as you are aware of, the journey is essentially a show that talks about individuals' their own life journey through different obstacles, different things that have set them back. Sometimes they're tragic. They're either through their own personal setbacks or maybe someone else's. And as you shared before, with your son Tommy, your oldest, dying in 2014 as a result of depression and ending in suicide. I know this past 5 years have been very much a journey for you. So why don't you kind of just fill us in, and what we can start back a little bit if you want to, back at that time period when Tommy died in August of 2014. But why don't you just kind of bring us up? We can jump in wherever you're at. But
well, I guess even to go before Tommy died, like I've been through a lot in my life, and I was always able to get through it and persevere. I guess you could say my resiliency was built up to a point that when things happened, I just figured a way to work through them. But the day Tommy died, I was the unfortunate one that found him after he had taken his life by suicide, and that rocked my world in a way that obviously you can't even imagine, finding your child that way. And although I knew, to a point in that moment that God, and my faith would help get me through it, I really didn't even know how I was going to survive this. Like, it's the worst, type of pain you could ever experience. So I just, that day, all the things that I had to go through, and it wasn't just one traumatic event of finding Tommy. It was, having my husband show up and seeing him break down. It was having my daughter show up. One of her counselors had drove her to the site where when she pulled up and the coroner's van's there and we're standing outside watching her face register what happened. So all of that was very traumatic for me, being the one who's always been the strong one, who's always been able to hold it together. And although I held it together to a point that day, as his girlfriend showed up who was pregnant with his child and, broke down, and, as his best friend showed up who just came by to visit, didn't even realize what was going on. I was able to hold it together that day, but what I started to notice was that, each day as things started going forward, I started having a harder time of holding it together. I started to have, episodes of not being able to control my feelings, my emotions, my thoughts. And that was very different for me because I've always been able to sort of reprogram my thoughts. When I would go down a negative road, I'd be able to refocus on something positive and be able to pull myself out of that. And this was something that I couldn't do that so easily with. And I guess it was about almost about a year later that it got to a point where I realized I needed to get help. I found myself in nothing really happened. They say that usually you can see triggers, and there were opportunities where I realized it was a trigger. Like one time I was driving down the street and there was an ambulance in front of me, and they turned on their sirens and started to do a U-turn because they were going on a call. And I found myself, starting to feel like I was almost hyperventilating, my heartbeat racing, and, started to cry and get very over emotional emotional, and I pulled off on the side of the road and spent about 15 minutes crying and trying to calm myself down. That made sense, right? The trigger was the ambulance.
Sure.
But this day at work, there wasn't any one thing that happened that I could pinpoint that made my body just start to respond in that same sort of way, to the point that I went into the bathroom at work, sat in the corner on the floor, and just bawled. And couldn't control it. I just couldn't stop it from happening. It was almost like when I was trying to explain it to my husband and friends, it was like, how you can feel almost like a heart attack starting to happen, but there's nothing you can do to stop it.
Right.
Or an asthma attack, it was like that. I couldn't stop it. Everything I tried didn't work. And so it was in that bathroom that I realized that it was time that I needed to get more work. I had done everything that everybody told me to do. After losing Tommy, I started a support group for suicide survivors, which helped tremendously to be able to, relate to people who have been through a suicide death, because there's so many things that come with that are very different from another type of death. I had, gone to counseling and was dealing with my grief. But the one thing I never did was deal with the trauma. And so it really became apparent to me that day in the bathroom that I had to deal with the trauma that I had experienced.
Okay. So when you, just for the person that may not, because you've had other traumatic things happen to you. I mean, your husband died. How old were you when your husband died?
I was 23. 23, okay. And I was pregnant with my daughter, and my son was 3.
Okay. And he died from a car accident? Is that
yes, he was drinking and driving.
Okay. And so, obviously, coming in, I mean, I'm assuming were you brought to the scene or brought to the hospital? What happened?
No, I wasn't. I was actually out of town at the time.
Okay.
And so I had to travel back from visiting my friend in California.
Okay.
And I had my son with me. So, finding an emergency flight to get back, whatever, got back. But I did have to go to the coroner's office and identify his body. That was pretty traumatic too, because it's one thing to identify his I had to go with his dad, and I remember going, and they wanted me to identify his tattoo because he had a tattoo on his chest, and that's how you can best identify a body. And so that was not an issue with me, but his dad wanted me to see everything, so he lifted up the rest of it, and he had traumatic brain injury from the accident. And so that image sticks with me forever. Okay. Just like the image of finding my son sticks with you forever. Right. And I did deal with some, things and trying to get through losing my husband and seeing that and everything as well. But it was different because I had my son and I was pregnant and I was all focused on that. And I think that, that kind of helped me get through and deal with it.
Okay. And that's what I was just curious about. What do you, not to say that one death of somebody is less than another one, but there was something about this particular, even for yourself, it sounds like that you were surprised that you were having this type of response to this differently than other things that you had faced.
Yeah, but I think the reality is when you're a mother and you carry a child for 8 months, there's a bond there and there's a connection there that is far different than any other connection you have. I've lost a husband. I've lost my mom. I've lost people that are very close to me. However, nothing can compare to losing a child and losing my son. And Tommy and I went through the traumatic loss of his dad together. He was my rock. I was pregnant with Micaiah, but Tommy was the one who we connected with one another and leaned on one another. He was only 3, but he was my rock. He was the one that helped me get through that and continue to move forward. And so I think that as well, we just had a different type of bond, not more or less than I have with my daughter, just different.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, knowing that he went through that, knowing that, he knew what it was like to lose a dad and have to grow up without a dad. And now his daughter has to do the same thing. Yeah. That also is heartbreaking for me,
Well, and I know you and I have had so many conversations about this, but when someone's in that darkness, they're not thinking rational, so they're so they're not thinking about EPSI. He wasn't thinking about EPSI. He wasn't thinking in that context, because that's what unfortunately happens with the depression, with the darkness, the depressive thinking that's happening at that time, is that it's a lot of times very irrational, very short, right now sighted, even though it may be saying things like, I think they'll be better off in the long run. Clearly, that's never the case. And so, going back to this idea, though, of and when you think of it being traumatic, I mean, there's a handful of different things that play into it. One, that you were the first on the scene, and then the visuals, right, and then all the other parts of the story that add to that, and then and just what you were just saying, and now with EPSI being born and all those different things, that was all part. So that was what I'm hearing you say. That's all part of the compounding aspect of the trauma. Right. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. And there are things that I know that other people don't know about the scene and about the things that really sat with me. And, just one of the things that helped me realize that Tommy really wasn't thinking like he normally would was that it was apparent to me that he wanted to die. You know what I mean? That he felt like there was no other option. There were things, like his phone being within arm's length, that if he wanted to reach out and grab it, he could have. There were things that he could have done to stop it if he started and was uncertain. So, they're just, things that I saw and questioned that other people maybe, that weren't there, and I haven't really shared much about that part of it. But, so that played a role in my mind too. Wow, and then for me, I think it helped that I myself, after finding Tommy, the depression and the grief and the PTSD that I was experiencing, because that's ultimately what I got diagnosed with and why I was having these episodes, helped me understand what it's like to have something control you that you don't have control over. And so it helped me understand that aspect of that he wasn't able to think about his daughter that was on the way, or that his family that was always there loving and supporting him no matter what. Those were things he couldn't think of, because his mind at that time was controlling different thoughts in his head, and that's what I truly believe, because I know if he would have thought of those things, he wouldn't have followed through with it. That was one thing that we talked about often, is that, he didn't want to have his kid grow up without a father like he did. So, it's one of those things that I think all of that plays a factor into, I have more information into the trauma than others do. And so I've had to work through that myself, where others maybe didn't have to.
Yeah. And I know when at different opportunities that we have to talk to people that want to learn more about what can they do to prevent suicide, and you come from a very unique situation where when you share about how much of a ripple effect it has had on you, your whole family, as well as individuals that have known Tommy. That's so much farther reaching than probably ever can be imagined, right? And I want to go back to the PTSD piece, because I know there's more and more research being done on PTSD, and the original work was done with soldiers, and that was the big aspect of working with soldiers regarding PTSD and having a better understanding and having more compassion about what combat soldiers were going through when they were in active duty. So, but one of the things that I think has, at least as a practitioner, that I have recognized is that PTSD, we call it a disorder, but it doesn't have to be a lifelong disability. I think for some people it ends up being that way, but it doesn't have to be a lifelong, you don't have to be disabled. It is something that's happened. It's not like you're going to get amnesia, but the intensity of when the symptoms were at its highest doesn't mean that it's always going to be that way.
Right.
And how can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, I think, when you're at the height of PTSD, it can be very disabling, because it affects every part of your life. It affects your relationships. It affects your activities, your work, everything. However, I think that, for me, finding the right form of treatment for the PTSD was crucial. I had people reaching out to me talking about a type of therapy and telling me I should reach out to a certain therapist to get this type of therapy for a long time, and I had looked it up, and I'm like, that sounds really weird and wacko, and I don't understand how that can work. I don't need that. I'll just go to a regular therapist, Well, after that day I spent in the bathroom, I pretty much was willing to try anything. And so I did reach out to a local therapist who works with police and was one of the renowned therapists locally that worked with police and fire for PTSD, and went through EMDR therapy with her, which was a therapy that I thought was just weird because you don't talk and you use, it was one of those things I was like, how does this work? I don't know. But I was willing to try anything. I went and I started to notice almost immediately a change. It doesn't, take away any memory. I obviously have every memory of that day still. But it made it in a way that I could talk about it, think about it, and it doesn't throw me back to that day. The emotions and the feelings in my body doesn't feel like I'm in that day again, which was what was happening previously. So for me, and that type of therapy is not, right for everybody.
Correct.
So for me, it was just being open and willing to try anything to find what worked for me. And I was very fortunate to be connected with somebody who was very good at that type of therapy, and that therapy worked for me. And so it's not disabling for me anymore, and I am able to work through it. There are still some things occasionally that do trigger me, but it's nothing like it used to be. So, but I think that's one of the, for me, one of the things that I've struggled with the most is with people trying to help them understand what it's like for me. Because if you've never experienced a mental, episode like PTSD, it's very hard for you to understand. And so even with my husband, he'd be like, I don't understand why you're acting this way, or why this is like this for you. It's been, 2 years, or it's been a year, or people that, friends like, you should be over this by now, and just, you have to stop and just be like, yeah, you don't understand because you didn't experience what I experienced. And as we know, people are more resilient than other people. What's traumatic for one person isn't traumatic for another, or different levels of how it affects us. So it's just understanding that everybody is different and they feel what they feel. And for me, I was very fortunate to be connected with who I was, and that it helped so much.
Well, I think it's a combination of it. I think it happens a lot of times where you were doing a lot of the right things. You were attempting to talk about it. You were trying to get involved. You were trying to not just suppress it. There was a lot of things that you were doing, but I think the difference happens for some individuals when we have a traumatic event. Our body internalizes that event, and so then we have a physical response to that, and we are, for a lack of better terminology, we're being triggered without the stimulus into that fight or flight. Our body's responding that way, though there is no stimulus for that to happen, and we have all this adrenaline going. And we don't know what's happening, and and then of course we get even more scared because we don't know what's happening.
Right.
So I think one of the things that, as a clinician, that by the fact that you were able to do a lot of those and you were proactive in a lot of ways, when she did diagnose you with PTSD and then offered that type of treatment, it was addressing that element of it that wasn't getting addressed before.
Right.
If you would have done that treatment maybe 12 months earlier, it may not have worked the same way because maybe there is other stuff that hadn't resonated. So there's something to be said about timing with everything, as well as what you said is that you were willing to try anything because you wanted relief from what was going on.
Right. And that's definitely, the therapist mentioned that because I came within a year after the trauma happening, that it's going to be more effective. One thing I found interesting, though, is as I was going through the therapy for Tommy's death and the trauma that was related to that, how other traumatic things came up, one of which was losing my husband. Yeah. And there was trauma related to that, which that was in 1997. Yeah. That came up as part of this therapy that I had no idea I hadn't really worked through or dealt with. We get so good at stuffing things, right? And then they come out at the most inopportune times. But at the same time, I'm thankful that I was where I was at and I was in a safe place that I could work through all of that and come out the other side. And because of that experience, I'm more open to try things. I've tried not just therapy, but different types of self-care that I never would have been open to in the past, just because I realized that, I don't know what works for me. I know some things that work for me for self-care, but I want to try other avenues to see if maybe that would help me as well. So it's opened me up as a person to try different things and be open to different types of options, and I'm grateful for that.
Well, and I think as you said earlier, when just using the one example of one of the traumas in your past was with your husband dying, you had to focus on being a mom. That had to take precedence over what was going on because it was immediate, it was undeniable, and because they were so small, you were pregnant. I mean, all these different variables, it maybe forced you to compartmentalize it and suppress it. Where when Tommy died, not only was McKay at a different age, but that same thing that was your rock before, now the rules have changed. And so now it becomes this double, this paradox. And so other things end up breaking through that earlier you could have put them in a box. And so we never know when that's going to happen and what that may be. But it is, I think that's one of the upside that when we start doing a little bit deeper work, we can start addressing some of those other issues that may have had that led to the compounding effect of that when Tommy did die, there was other things that may have not have been addressed earlier.
Right. Yeah.
So I know there's a lot of things that you do now that and even though I knew who you were, prior, I don't know how many different conversations we had prior to Tommy dying, and I know I definitely didn't know, other than you being involved with as a youth director and involved with that element of things. I didn't know much of what you were doing, but now I know you're involved with a lot of different things. And so tell us a little bit about, as you have been healing and as you have physically healing, mentally healing, there's been other things that you've been involved with. I know you're an instructor for mental health first aid. Obviously, you have your foundation that you're doing to raise awareness, and you go into schools as well as other organizations. But so tell us a little bit about all those different things.
Well, one of the first things that I started doing, I think, was the teen support groups. So, working with Group Hope and establishing teen groups, realizing that there was a need in our community for that. and understand.
Tell us a little bit about Group Hope, or what is Group Hope and what's Teen Group Hope?
So Group Hope was established by Dr. Charles Smith after losing his daughter to suicide as well. And they're just support groups for individuals who are struggling with mental illness or emotional, struggles, to go and relate with one another and get support from one another. It's facilitated by somebody, but, it's not a trained therapist. It's not meant to be a therapy. It's just a support group, like a mutual help support group. One of the things that I realized, there were no teen groups, so I worked with Dr. Smith, and we established he trained me to be a facilitator on how they run Group Hope. I started teen groups and have been doing that now for almost, I think it'll be about 4.5 years. So that's one thing. What that did for me was listening to the kids, listening to what it's like for them to live with depression and eating disorders and, bipolar, all the different things that each of them struggle with, really helped me understand from a different perspective what Tommy was going through. That was really crucial to part of my healing, is being able to understand. One of those teens, shared with me the fact that, when they attempted at one point in time, how they couldn't think about the future or the past. All they could think about was the pain they were feeling in that moment. And even though they knew they had family members that cared and supported them, like, they couldn't think of that. And that really helped me validate what I was already thinking, that Tommy wasn't able to think about any of us in that moment of despair. And so that helped with my healing and helped me better understand what he was going through and what he was feeling. I also then, obviously started working with you and SOS and speaking in the schools. But then about 2 years ago, about 2.5 years ago, I went to a class for mental health first aid. Went to the class to get trained myself and realized how beneficial the training was, how it covered all of the different mental illnesses. It helped create action plans on how you can help people. You're not meant to be a professional, but to kind of, step in as that intermediate person to keep them safe in a crisis and get them connected to the right kind of help. And so one of the things I realized that I needed to do was become an instructor for that, because the cost of the class that the instructors were charging was more than what most people could afford to do. And so I went to this week-long class, got trained to be an instructor, started teaching a couple classes myself, then very early on got connected with Chief Jamie Evans from the Roscoe Police, who is also an instructor, and now we team up to do the classes. One of the great things we've been able to do with our foundation that we established for Tommy was the money that we raise, we can use to cover the cost of the books. And then Jamie and I donate our time often to be able to teach the class, to offer it free of charge.
Gotcha.
So it's a class that's worth, they say the value of it is about $170 per person per class. But the value that I see in offering it for free is more people are being trained and better understand and can help people. And I think that that's important.
Sure.
So we've been able to train just the general public, people that are very interested in learning how to help support individuals who are struggling, and that is critical. So that's one thing we've been able to do. And then, we just pretty much do what we can. Our foundation has also, over the last year, established a fund that can help people who can't afford counseling to get counseling, and working with, a couple different organizations like KP Counseling to be able to get people in, get them the help that they need, and not let the financial piece of it be a burden for them.
Sure.
And that's what I was hearing most often from people is, well, I need to go to a counselor, but I don't have insurance, or, my insurance application's in process, but it's not through yet. So that's what our organization decided to do as a board, is be able to fill that gap. Gotcha. I also sit on the NAMI board, and that's been critical just in being a part of the education and support groups and so forth. And I think that they're a very valuable asset in our community as well. We have great resources in our community when you think about it from this standpoint. There's so many great organizations doing great things and making an impact. And so I'm really proud of our community and that fact. And so it just makes me realize how lucky we are to have the organizations that we have. The support group I mentioned that I went to, Ray of Hope, a suicide survivor support group, they're not everywhere.
Right.
We're very fortunate to have that in our community and have great facilitators that keep that group going for the last 30 years.
Right, yeah.
And I'm thankful for that.
And I agree with you. I know when we met in beginning of August, and we were talking about the combination of the events that you were involved with and facilitating, the ones that NAMI was doing, that Shatter Our Silence was doing. I think we had something weekly, if not multiple times a week, for almost 8 to 9 weeks straight, from the middle of August all the way to the middle of October.
Right.
Which was something I don't think I'm ever been aware of before.
Right.
That there was that consecutively that much that was continually to be offered for the community, and so and recognizing that just doesn't end when those when August, September, and October ends, that continue to have conversations. And I know that there's been multitude of opportunities to continue speaking since then into the schools, and there's been an increased awareness about that.
Right.
But you've also been involved with some other things. I mean, not only are you involved from an organizational standpoint, but just recently you did something that you've been wanting to do for a long time, which was write a section for a book.
Right.
And so tell us about what that desire was and what that process was like and where that's at now.
Well, I've actually been writing a book because my whole life slogan I've said is finding purpose in the pain. Yeah. So I've been writing a book about my journey through losing Tommy and, his story, my story in one book, I guess you could say. Also the faith aspect of it, because that's huge for me. If it wasn't for my faith and that foundation that I had, I don't know if I would have come out the other side of this, to be honest with you. I believe that God knew what was going to happen, and obviously, and my faith and the way that it built up to this point, if that wouldn't have been there, I think it would have been a different outcome for me.
Before we go any further, let me ask you about that piece, because we'll hear a lot of people talk about that, but how do you think, going through the different things over the last 5 years, maybe even leading up to that, has your faith changed? If there's a before 2014 and an after 2014, has your faith changed? And if it has, in what way?
Definitely yes, and definitely stronger.
Okay.
Because being able to, for me, when I would go through difficult things before the loss of Tommy, I would always, say, why me? Mm-hmm. That would be the first thing, why me? Why me? Because I've had lots of bad things happen in my life. Why does this keep happening to me? When I lost Tommy, my perspective was different in the fact that I didn't ask that. I didn't understand why it had to happen to me, but I wasn't asking, why me, God? Mm-hmm. Instead, I was just saying, I don't understand why this happened, but I trust that you're going to make something good of this through this. And I really did, from the moment, I don't ever find a time where I look back, I remember that day in that home after finding Tommy and, people coming and going, just saying to God, I'm going to trust you through this. I'm not going to blame you. I'm not going to turn against you. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to stand in my faith. I'm going to believe that even though this seems like the most painful thing I'll ever have to get through, that you're going to get me through this. And that's different than any other thing or any other time I've been through. So right away, I just remembered trusting God.
Why do you think you were saying that? Why? I mean, if you can put it into words, why?
I think it was just because I had realized, even though I had been through all those things in my life previously, I never recognized God was there and able to bring me through it. That at that point in time in my life, I was able to look back and see that even though I lost a husband, right, and was left as a single mom for many years, that then I found Corey, and Corey has been an amazing father, an amazing husband, and that even at that point in time in my life, I was able to look back through every bad thing that had happened in my life and find that good came out of it. And I trusted that that was going to happen this time for the first time immediately. I didn't have to see it to believe it. I knew it before it even happened. And one of the things I talk a lot about, so we were talking about the book. I just recently co-authored a book with 12 short stories of people who had experienced mental illness and have been able to live successfully through that. And what my chapter is called Transforming Wounds into Wisdom. And I talk a lot about how I trusted that God would take these wounds and make something out of them, and He has. And I wish I didn't have to experience losing my son to become the person that I am and experience the things that I have. But I'm thankful that through that, God's been able to make it a story, make a connection, make opportunities for me to share not only Tommy's story, but my story, and help other people. I wish that I didn't have to lose my son for that to happen, but I'm thankful that I can now help people because of that. And so for me, the faith foundation and being able to lean on God through that, and being able to trust Him before it even happens is huge. It's was something that I've never been able to do in my life, and I believe that the relationship that I had with Him at that point that I lost Tommy was crucial for that, because I really did. I had a good, like a firm foundation that I could lean back on that wasn't going to crumble because of something so devastating. And I've watched that happen with people when they don't have that firm foundation, and I'm just so thankful that I did. And I also believe that because of that foundation and that faith, I've been able to see that and believe that Tommy is okay, and he is, where he needs to be. And I get those signs to let me know that even though it sucks that I have to live every day without him, that he's okay and that I'm going to be okay.
When you were just talking about that, and I'd never heard that part of the story, that when people were coming to your house, that you were silently saying to yourself that you were committing yourself to trusting the unknown, trusting what had not happened yet, and that was fundamentally different than other times in your past. And as you said earlier, maybe because this is something that, though there had been bad things that have happened prior, there was nothing comparable to this type of element, and no way to describe that for you. I remember one time when we were doing a talk together, and I think it was for the Girl Scouts, if I remember correctly, and I had one of the slides that I was referencing that day was about individuals. A study was done by the International Committee on Traumatic Events and Survivors of Traumatic Events, and they talked about that people respond to traumatic events in one of three ways. And one way they said is that people become permanently dispirited. They become broken and in response to that traumatic event and never recover. Two, they get back to normal, they just stuff it, compartmentalize it, and maybe that's what happened in some prior traumatic events in your life. You put it into a box and you just went on because you had to, because of whatever. And then the third one is that because of the event, you came out of your comfort zone, came out of different places that only would have happened if the event only happened because the event happened. And I don't think it's because we want those events to happen,
right,
but it's that process of trusting something greater than ourselves, trusting God, that okay, this has happened. What are we going to do with this? What are we to do from this? What am I to learn from this? ultimately, what am I to give back to others?
Right.
And clearly, that's a big part of what you've been doing since then. This would not be the work you'd be doing, most likely, would not be the work you'd be doing if this hadn't happened.
Right. I mean, I always invested in teens as a youth leader, but not in the capacity that I do now. And my compassion has deepened for individuals who are, dealing with mental illness or struggles in general. I mean, I always was compassionate, but it's like tenfold now, because not only can I relate on a level after experiencing my own journey through this, but it's just different because of what we've been through, just way more open and compassionate. I think once you experience it yourself, it allows you to open up in a different way to people, and be there for different people. But for me, like, when you talk about those three different options, like, I feel like if I were to do one of the first two options, and personally for me, it would be dishonoring to my son, dishonoring to my family, and dishonoring to God, because I know that Tommy would not want that for me, that he would not want his death to be for nothing. He would want it to mean something, or to make a difference in someone's life. And so for me, immediately I knew that, and have just worked since then. The reason why I haven't quit, I can tell you that there were many people that said in the first year when I was doing everything I was doing, she's gonna burn out. She's gonna end up quitting this eventually. This is too much for somebody to do. The reason I haven't is because of the promise I made to God that day, the trust I had in Him, that if He opened the doors, I would walk through them and be obedient to that, and that I trusted He would make something good out of this. But also because everything I do is to honor Tommy. How could I quit on that? If I quit on that, I'm quitting on Him, and I will never do that, ever. Yeah. So, for me, it was like when people would say that, I'd be like, you don't know what's driving me. Yeah. You don't know who's standing behind me. Yeah. Like, it's impossible to give up or quit or not continue this. Yeah. I honestly don't know. And I've had, trust me, it's a mental battle every day, because, I question myself, and, I don't have the degrees behind my name. How can I really help anybody, or I'm not good enough for, like all of those things that we all battle with. Like, I have a full-time job that I have to be committed to that pays the bills. So I fill the rest of my time. And then I wonder, is that taking away from my own family and the things that are also priority in my life? So it's a battle. But at the same time, I won't quit. I won't stop, because I know that this is a purpose that's been given to me by God, and I know that this is a promise that I've given Tommy, that I won't let this be for nothing. Yeah.
Well, and I think, and I understand when people say that. You mean, number one, they don't know. They know from their perspective maybe, but they don't know from your perspective. And at the same time, I think there's something to be said that, and you and I've had this conversation as well, sometimes we have to reframe how we're doing it. We have to look at it and go, okay, maybe I need to do this differently. Maybe I need to do this more efficiently. I need to be strategic about what I'm saying yes to. Yeah. So I can say no to the right things and say yes to the right things. I think there's all those things that we learn, because when we first start, we're almost surprised that someone wants us to come and talk, and then later we have to discern, self-care wise, discern what am I saying yes to, so it has the greatest amount of either impact, or it's the right thing to say yes to. Right. And I can't do that if I'm always running. If I'm always saying yes, if I'm always busy, I can't discern. I'm not letting God guide. Right. I'm just going, and I know that's been a journey for you as well, in that.
Yeah, there's definitely, I want to do it all, right? I want to do it all because I care, and I just want to. But I've been noticing even more recently that certain doors are closing and other doors are staying open. And so for me, it's, one of the things I've been, focusing on and praying over is that although I want to go through this door, right, God's keeping this door open. So I need to understand that maybe this door is meant for somebody else and my door is meant for me. And my door is just as important as that door. And so, just being okay with it, being content with that, and accepting that my doors are important and my doors are what I need to focus on, and don't focus on trying to walk through or open up other doors that are meant for somebody else.
Right.
And that's hard to swallow sometimes, because maybe that door is really the door you want to be walking through personally.
Sure,
but trusting that, God has the right doors open for the right reasons. And that if these doors are meant to open, they're going to open because God puts that on the heart of those people to open that door for me. And just trusting that, and trusting the timing, because again, we all want things when we want them. And God has a different plan and a different idea, and just trusting that when the timing is right and the opportunity is right, that He'll make that happen. Yeah. And if not, again, being content with where you're at and what you're doing. Yeah. And it's so funny because, the work that we do is hard. I'm a very compassionate, empathetic person. So when I'm working with these kids that are struggling, my husband could tell you, I take it on. It hurts. I come home and I cry for them because I care. It's personal. And so it's hard because you grow weary, but then it's so funny because as soon as I start to grow weary and think like, can I continue to do this? Am I really cut out for this? Something happens. Someone comes in, someone says something, or, and it shows me that I'm exactly where I need to be, doing exactly what I need to be doing, whether I'm weary or tired or not, that I needed. And, or that I get, something happens where somebody does something that gives me that break that I need, or that encouragement that I need, because it does get hard. But I also know that it's something I have to do.
Yeah. It is being tired because we care a lot about what happens, and then also there's times when we get frustrated because it feels like either there's barriers there, or you never know, right? If it's one more conversation, and then there may be a breakthrough. Right. But prior to that one more conversation, one more whatever, we don't necessarily see that there's going to be a breakthrough, and so I grow weary with that sometimes. Yeah. And then when I'm not trusting that process, when I'm not trusting, as we talk all the time about, I just need to show up. If I just show up, if I'm just present and show up and open, then I'll be utilized. And the doors will appear. Again, going back to what you said, I sometimes need to quiet myself and be aware of, is this my desire to go through the door, or is it, or is there something else going on? Right. And I have to be aware of that as well, because sometimes I'll get headstrong and want to just keep pushing at something, and if it's clearly not going to be opening, I need to be open to going in a different direction. I think that idea of self-care is important. Following those things that you do desire, regardless if necessarily what the outcome's going to be. As we've talked many times, if just one person hears this story today, and that makes a difference for them, right? Because I know that there's, just in the last few weeks, there's been a lot of parents who are now struggling because there's been a handful of people that have died from suicide. Variety of ages, not just young adults, also in older adults, and there's going to be that ripple effect. And so being able to share the story of how you walk through different things, and how though it feels like all doors are closed, the doors are different.
And I think one thing that I found very important very early on too is perspective. So I remember one of the first interviews I did with Tommy's story, I said, obviously we all have questions and we want to know answers and what ifs and whatever, right? Just remembering that none of that's going to change what happened, right? And focusing on that can keep you very stuck. But also, for me, instead of focusing on the time that I wasn't going to have with Tommy and all the things he was going to miss, I focused on the time I was blessed to have him. So I had said something along the lines of, I had 20 years with him where some people only get 20 days with their child. Right. So for me, it's like always keeping that perspective, because it's very easy for me to go down the road, right, of he's not here for his daughters. He's not here for my daughter's graduation. She's going to be graduating college this year. He's going to miss that. He's missing it. I could focus on all the things that he's missing and he's not here for, or I can remember that I was so blessed to have him for 20 years and all the memories that we have from that and all the things that we got to experience with him and all the funny stories that we have. So whenever I find myself going down the dark road, I just try to refocus on the light and the fact that we had those 20 years of memories, and some people don't even get that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a combination of a lot of things, right? Because many times they're not going to come if we just sit by ourselves in our own thoughts. We have to go and talk to other people. We have to hear other people's stories. We professionally may need to go see someone. We may need to do things out of our comfort zone. We may need to figure out, even though it doesn't make sense at the time, that if this is the greatest tragedy that has occurred in my life, then how do I find purpose in that? Right. How do I find some deeper meaning other than just that it now gets to be claimed as the most traumatic event in my life? There needs to be a bigger story there. I know, referring to one of the books that has helped me and that I refer out is Ryan Holiday's book, The Obstacle is the Way. And one of the excerpts that I pulled out of that was given some point into the future, let's say it's next summer, so the summer of 2020, if it's based upon a book that you're writing, based upon something that you want to create, something you want to do, or even where you want to be, what's the story you want to tell come July of 2020? That's the story you're writing currently. So I know for me, when I get weary, get tired, don't feel like I can, I remind myself, what story do I want to tell at this given point? Even the setbacks are going to be part of the story. Right. What I do with the setbacks are going to be part of the story. What I do with the opportunities that come up, the good things that happen too, that's all part of the story. It helps me to be mindful of when stuff's happening, when I'm tired, when stuff appears not to be happening. Those are all part of the story, because ultimately July of 20 is going to come. What am I going to say? What am I going to do? What's the story? I didn't do anything with the last 9 months. Right. Well, I probably did something, but it may not have been focused. It may not have been disciplined. It may not have been intentional. Right. So what things right now? I know you guys just did a release of the book that you guys collaborated on. What things do you have going on right now? Because it seems like you always have something going on. So,
believe it or not, not that much right now. No, okay. I'm still, my goal that I set for myself, which I'll be surprised if I make, is to finish my book that I've been working on for 4 years by the end of this year.
Okay. So in the next 2 months.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which it's, it's one of those things, like it's 80% done and I just need to go back and finish it, right? Okay. But I just don't have the time or make the time. So that's, one of my main goals right now. And then just continuing, we've been really focusing on, getting as many trainings for mental health first aid. And we have a training coming up this Friday that we're doing a lot of city officials from different departments. Next
for the city of Rockford,
right?
Okay.
And then next month we're doing one for the UIC nurses.
Okay.
So, that keeps us busy trying to get that information in there, and then just, focusing on building up the teen group and starting, one of the goals is to try to start a young adult group, because we have a lot of the teens that have been coming to my group for the last 3 or 4 years who are now aging out.
Okay.
And so, those are the kind of things that I'm really focusing on now, is building up facilitators so that we can have another group, and trying to keep consistent, with the group that we have, and just, being open to whatever other doors are opening and whatever we can do. So
Sure. Okay. Well, if someone was interested in either reading your book or learning more about your book or your organization, what's the best way for people to get a hold?
Well, the book right now, you can go to, it's basically xavierwhitford.net to order the book and, get information about what I'm doing personally. The Tommy Carell Memorial Foundation, you can Google that and find out information about what we're doing and what's going on. We don't really have too much going on with that until our walk in April. That will come up really fast.
Sure.
Again, it's like you think you end something and something else is coming right around the corner.
Sure.
So, but yeah, that's, one of the things. We also, continuing to do our grief groups. So my husband and I both do. I facilitate a mom's grief group. He facilitates a dad's grief group for parents who have lost a child by any means. It doesn't matter. So continuing to, that's something I'm very passionate about too, is, supporting other people that are going through that and offering opportunities for them. So we've been working about getting some little retreats together to give people an opportunity to go and just heal and work through whether it's grief, trauma, whatever they're going through. So that's something else I have on my radar that I've had on my heart to do, is doing a retreat in the next year for individuals that want to come and spend a day or a weekend to focus on themselves and work through that stuff, and partnering with other people, and offering opportunities to do that. So.
Sure. Okay. Gotcha. And the grief group that you and Corey do, I know you work with women and he works with the fathers, so
right.
the men. Where is that and what time is that?
So we meet the third Thursday of every month at Riverside Community Church from 7 to 8:30.
Okay.
And again, it's for anybody that's lost a child that wants to come and connect with other parents that are going through that. So, our group's we've been doing that now. Again, it was one of those things that we couldn't find a group like that,
Sure.
So we just started one.
Right. Yeah. That's how it works.
You know
sometimes.
what I mean? And so that's been going for a few years now. We've been doing
Sure.
that because, and really, really have made great connections and friends through that as well.
Okay. Xavier, as we wrap up today, what would be, if there's one thing that you wanted to share with individuals who've had setbacks, who've had something traumatic happen to them, regardless if that was a death or some other traumatic event that's happened, what would you want to share with somebody?
Well, I think, obviously it's important to reach out to a community of people that can support you through that. Mm-hmm. But also just, trusting and believing no matter what we go through, no matter what pain we experience, no matter what wounds we have, that we can turn that into a purpose, and we can get through that. And not only, I always say, I didn't survive this, but I'm able to thrive through this. Mm-hmm. And that's something that anybody can do with the right amount of support, the right amount of therapy, whatever that might be for that person, and just believing that you can and will get through it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us today on the journey. Xavier Whitford, as she shared her story of a series of different traumatic events that she's had in her life, but the significant one that happened 5 years ago, and that how in the midst of that darkness that she found that light and has now continued to be able to shine for others in the community and for others that she hasn't probably even met. So go to xavierwhitford.net and find out more about her, as well as what she's doing, as well as looking to the book that she was part of, and the book that will be coming out next year. Thank you very much for joining us today, and I will see you again next week.